Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first Conexiones virtual panel. My name is Bree Christophers. I'm from the great class of 2017, and I serve as one of the co-chairs of the Conexiones Committee, which is the committee within the Association of Latino Princeton Alumni, which plans events and initiatives for current Princeton Latinx students and young alums. At Princeton, I studied molecular biology, and I was co-president of Princeton Latinos y Amigos. I'm currently a joint MD-PhD student at Weill Cornell Medicine in New York City. The goal of today's panel is to inform current Princeton students and young alums about the topic of adulting, so making it out in the real world once you leave the orange bubble. If you're watching live, please feel free to ask questions in the live chat box. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Soraya Morales Nuñez. She's from the class of 2018. She majored in politics with certificates in Latin American studies and the practice of diplomacy. She currently works at a law firm in Boston and is looking into further exploring her interests before applying to law school or a joint degree program. So take it away, Soraya.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight for this live chat. I have 3 panelists with us tonight who will be talking a little bit about what their experience after Princeton was like in terms of professional opportunities, school opportunities, and kind of just the ins and outs of what it means to begin adulting after graduation. I know that there are a lot of questions, that emerge once, as you're getting ready to graduate, even after you graduate, even after a few years out. So we hope that the discussion tonight can help inform some of our viewers about some of the experiences and decisions these ladies have made in their respective paths. So before we get started with the questions, I'd like to give an introduction to each of them. So we have Rosio Pedroso. If you could just wave, give your name. So she is principal and founder of Pedroso Consulting, which is working to improve the educational and mental well-being of those who are underserved. We have Marielle Villar Martiney, class of 2014, who is an active dancer and studied Latin American comparative politics at Princeton. She is committed to public service, having worked in government, electoral politics, nonprofits, and a social impact venture capital firm. And she is still figuring out adulting and just moved in with her partner. So that's exciting. And we have Taylor Frazier Hernandez, class of 2014, who majored in history with a certificate in African American studies. She holds a master's of public health degree in maternal and child health policy from Boston University. And she is a rising 2L at Washington University School of Law, where she is focusing on public interest law and policy. So we have a couple of questions for our panelists tonight, but of course, as Bree said, members of the audience are welcome to submit their questions via the chat box. So first question is open to whoever would like to go first. And I'd like for you to just tell us a bit about yourselves and what path you took after graduating Princeton.
So I can go first. Thank you, first of all, to Conexiones for having this event and allowing me to share my experiences with all of you, inspiring and amazing women. So my path after Princeton was not quite what I expected. I thought I was going to go into teaching, and so I did Teach for America, but realized that I really wanted to do more academic work. And so I applied to a master's in public policy. After about 3 years of teaching, I did that and thought I was going to stay in Washington, D.C. I studied at Georgetown to get my MPP. And in fact, that was not what I ended up doing. I ended up moving back because family happens. My mother ended up getting ill, and I came back to California. And here I found a job in research with an organization called Management Planning and Research, NPR Associates, out of Berkeley, California. And I started my work with education research.
Great. I can follow up. I went into a master's program immediately after graduating from Princeton. I did my master's in public health and maternal and child health policy, and I moved back to New York after that to work in health policy full-time for 2 years with the Community Service Society. And within those 2 years, I realized that even though we were doing a lot of policy work in the public interest, that everybody I worked for was an attorney. So I decided to follow in that path to hopefully make me a better advocate and better at my job. And I went to law school. So now I'm at WashU. I'm working at Children's Defense Fund right now during my 1L summer, and I'll be back in classes in the fall.
So I can go next. I always tell folks that looking back a year in the past, every single year from now to 2014, I would not have even imagined what I would be doing today. I just had my 5th year reunion, and I just started my 5th job. I did federal consulting with Deloitte right out of school, and then quickly found myself loving smart cities and transferring to a internal innovation group within Deloitte. I was always on the intersection between public and private sector, and after 2016, I said, what am I waiting for? And I decided to pursue a public affairs fellowship in New York City. I moved from DC to New York. After that fellowship, I became a campaign manager in rural Pennsylvania. Then I moved back to New York to do social impact VC and philanthropy work. And I just started a position at a nonprofit that actually serves my community in New York City in the Lower East Side. It has a big Puerto Rican community, which is, near and dear to my heart, WIPA. And yeah, so I have bounced around between many different things, and I believe in being open, because if I wasn't open, I would not be where I am today.
Thank you. Very exciting. We have a pretty wide range of experiences on the panel tonight, and I'm very excited to hear how you respond to the questions that I have for you, but also what viewers may be asking of us. So my first substantive question for you is, what was a challenge you faced when entering the quote-unquote real world? How did Princeton prepare you or didn't prepare you for this particular challenge?
So one challenge that comes to mind, and actually I've had conversations with younger folks, particularly Latino women, is the spaces I worked in as a consultant and then in the philanthropy and VC world, was that I was often the youngest person in the room, one of the only women, one of the only women of color. And at Princeton is a predominantly white space, but it's also, you're surrounded by people who are your own age. And how to be taken seriously when you're young and small, and you really have to figure out how to prove yourself, but also stay true to who you are and not become a different person. So that's something I'm still, in all honesty, figuring out. And I found that having mentors who are women have been huge, because I feel like I can be myself around them, and they also believe in me without me having to go out of my way to prove myself. So I think that's been a big challenge that, granted, exists in very more specific workspaces and environments.
I have to say that I for me, it was a similar experience, not when I was teaching. Fortunately, I was in Los Angeles and around, people who look like me, who talk like me. But when I came back from my master's program and started actually working in the consulting world, I was the only Latina in my organization, and I did not have the skills to reach out to a mentor. I did not even know that you can have a mentor. I didn't know how to start a conversation. How do you go up to somebody who's 15, 20 years older than you and ask for advice? I mean, I think that's one of the challenges of coming out of Princeton, is I didn't really prepare, at least me, for that experience. And I thought that was a great deficit, because there were such incredible people around me. And even though they might not have been from my culture, that I could learn a lot from them. I just didn't know how to approach them. So I think the issue of mentoring is so, so important, especially when we're starting off new in our career, and we really want to, emulate and gather skills and strategies from people who've been there before. And it's a great asset. One I wish I would have tapped into sooner.
So I think to echo what everybody else has said about mentoring, it's so important. And I definitely had the experience of being the youngest, the only woman of color, particularly in situations where I was trying to advocate on behalf of people of color, and it felt like I was trying to make people care about my communities. And so that was something that I don't think Princeton quite prepared me for, but I'm going to kind of take my answer in a bit of a different direction. I don't think Princeton prepared me to really set appropriate boundaries in between my work life and my personal life. I think I spent a lot of time studying, which is totally what you're supposed to do in college, but you also don't know when to say when. And that can turn into you working late into the night when you don't necessarily need to. That can turn into you not sleeping. It can make you sick. So learning how to set those boundaries in graduate school was kind of the first hard lesson of adulting for me.
Thank you. And that answer actually leads into my next question about creating balance between the professional and the personal commitments in the quote unquote real world outside of the context that is Princeton. Taylor, do you want to share maybe some of the tools or advice you've gotten on creating that balance?
Sure. So I would say this is something that mentors have helped me with as well. Mentors who have had the experience that I've had and said, no, this is what you're going to do now so that you don't make the same mistakes that I've made. So I will say, learning how to work smarter, not harder, learning how to prioritize things. When I was teaching, I taught 2 classes when I was in graduate school, being able to say, okay, I'm going to respond to emails within 24 hours instead of immediately, or I'm not going to respond to emails after 9 or 10 p.m. So being able to kind of do those types of things, take the personal time that I got at work, take vacation, those types of things that I feel like we're often encouraged not to do to show that we work hard. I did work hard. I do work hard, but that still means that I need breaks and needs time and space to be my best self so that I can give my best self to all of the people that I'm working on behalf of and give my best self to my education. So.
If I could add to that, I think, the Princeton experience, I think I can speak for myself, but I'm sure it happens to a lot of it was a challenging experience and one that we may not have been as prepared for, especially coming from a low income, primarily Spanish speaking community. The work ethic of working hard is just ingrained. And I think as a culture, it's hard for us not to work hard and to change that mindset and say, what is our mental health? Do I have things that I engage in that relieve my stress? That's something we never talked about in my family. So coming to terms with the fact that that there's such a thing as mental health and you have to take care of yourself. What are the things that you do on a daily or weekly basis that make you happy, that relieve your stress? And we need to, as a suggestion, be able to identify those things and put them into practice, because that work-life balance only gets harder. I have 2 kids now and have my own business, and I'm probably, as busy as I was before, but in a different way. And learning how to manage that is there's a challenge every day.
And I'll add just one more thing is in terms of boundaries, it's not just boundaries around your work, but also boundaries around your friends and people you're with. I remember when I first moved to DC, I didn't know a lot of people. So my mindset was, I'm just going to say yes to everything because I want to have a community and I want to make friends. But I didn't leave any space for myself. And I was also doing the same thing with work. And now that I'm in New York and I have a phenomenal community here, I still find myself struggling to just have time away just for myself, because at Princeton, all your friends are down the hall or 30 seconds away, or at the most, maybe a 5-10 minute walk. Whereas that's not how it is here. And make your friends maybe across the country or even in your own city take a minimum of 30 minutes to get there. So, the mentality of you still want to keep up your friendships, but you also want to keep up yourself. So I found that it's not just work-life balance, but work-life friends, work-life hobbies, and how to make sure that there's still room for me and just thinking and being alone and cooking. So that's also been very interesting. I find my calendar gets very busy very quickly, and I have to say, nope, I need to slow down a bit.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say even myself being 1 year out of college, that's something I struggle with, is making sure that there's time on my own calendar for myself, right? So college helps us specialize in a particular field of study. You know, we go in, we choose our major, we choose certificates, we get involved on campus, you know, academically and unacademically. But there's often less support provided for building practical skills that we find ourselves using daily outside of college, you know, inside and outside the workplace, and you know, in our professional programs. To this end, what is one skill, you know, one set of knowledge that you believe every college graduate, you know, or someone, you know, thinking about, you know, who's thinking about that next step after college, what should they be equipped with?
I have two quick things. The first is I saw the value of a liberal arts education, and after I graduated, I was like, I know how to think. I may not know, specific strategies or formulas, but I know how to think and look at a problem, break it down, and figure out a solution. And that has been invaluable in all the different things I've done. But the other thing that I think is really important that I don't think Princeton really prepares you for is differentiating between the textbook correct answer and the real life correct answer. And by that I mean like small p politics. Like what's the thing that you say to move the hearts and minds of people who are in the room to get them to come over to your side. It may not be the textbook answer, and that's a very interesting nuance and differentiation. But I think that also stems from being able to think and not just reiterate and regurgitate things that have been told to you.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on your last comment. I think communication and not necessarily convincing, but I think there's something to that, saying, my viewpoint is appropriate, or bringing about the group to see your point of view is something that is needed every single day of your job, whatever it may be. And that sense of collaboration and communicating is, I agree. I don't think that was perhaps something that was the best takeaway from Princeton. Academic wise, again, I think being analytical, and we're great analysts in our own right, but that communication and collaboration piece, I think, is something that we all need every day, and not something necessarily that Princeton prepares you for.
So I would say that at MPS, not necessarily being taught how to collaborate with others in a non-competitive way. I was not in the sciences. I know that it's a totally different world when you're an engineer or you're in the hard sciences at Princeton, but in the humanities and social sciences, I really felt like it was a very individualized program. You were focused on yourself and what you needed to do. And in public policy making, you are always in a room with several other people. Some of them have strong or difficult personalities, and you have to learn how to get along with them enough to make something happen, especially when you're working on behalf of children and families or on behalf of low-income people like I have, because it's so much more important that you get something done for those people. And in my case, often for my people, than it is for me to get annoyed with this person who is, who really doesn't know how to act. I have to get over that for the people. Although, and I also want to say, this is not like a work skill, but something else that I really feel like all college graduates should have, especially those who are coming from lower income backgrounds or who are first gen, is financial literacy. Oh my God, it is so important. And that's definitely something that we don't get in college or high school. And it's so, so important from the moment you start working for you to have those skills in place to build a future for yourself.
Yeah, and I think as for those of us who are first generation and low income, it's not part of our education literacy to say, I'm going to have to put away for retirement. I have to have a savings.
Exactly.
There's emergencies that come up all the time. You're still part of a family. You have siblings who have emergencies. Mothers get cancer. It's really hard to say, okay, every paycheck, no matter what, I'm going to take 5% or 10% and put it away. It's a real hard discipline, because it's something that I wasn't brought up doing. And when you see an emergency, you're not prepared for it. And I think that is a really valuable skill. The sooner you can start your retirement, don't ever touch it. My recommendation, those skills are really important.
Definitely, and I think that for first gen low income students, it can be a different ballpark many times, right? Coming out of college, it's sometimes at school where a lot of the times at school at Princeton we're with peers who are legacy students or who have come in with a set of tools that we didn't have, right? The start line was a little further ahead for us than it was for them, and so by the time we get there, they're already running halfway through the race, right? And that doesn't end when you graduate Princeton, right? That there are challenges that are new and continue you to be confronted with even after you graduate, and that that kind of leads to my next question about community. As graduates with these unique experiences, how did you navigate trying to find community outside of what Princeton was, and how did you create community for yourselves in these new environments outside of the orange bubble once you left it?
I can start this time. I have been fortunate enough to have lived in a city where at least one of my really close girlfriends from Princeton was also living, which made all of my transitions a lot easier. In St. Louis now, for the first time, I'm with no friends from college or from outside of college. And so I've been able to find community outside of kind of the Princeton community that's followed me through community work, and that was true when I was in Boston as well, through my church, which is also another way that I volunteered. So I made quite a few friends through church and through serving my community, which were both really great. Community work is also great, not just because you're helping other people, but when you're in a position where you're working really hard all the time and you are very individually focused, it helps give you perspective and remind you of everything else that's out there and maybe why you're doing what you're doing. And so it's important for that too, in addition to feeling connection, especially if you're far from home. And then I'll also say that because I've been a student for a lot of the time since I've left college, I have been able to look for some of the same sources of support. I will say that they were, the schools that I've attended since have not been as diverse as Princeton, even as we talk about how Princeton is predominantly white. It made me really appreciate how diverse Princeton was. But, I still am involved in affinity groups and things like that. I'm president of our Latino Law Students Association. There's like 4 of us, but I'm making it work. And so those relationships are still very important. And I also talk to my friends and to my family almost every day. Like, you don't lose those connections just because, you're not at reunions or because your friends aren't around anymore.
So for me, so right after college, I did Teach for America, and I'm originally from California, from a small town called Salinas, and I ended up being in LA. And so it was an environment where I was with like-minded people. So I was fortunate in that, and in a community that was very receptive. So I found a lot of connections, and I felt like I belonged, which was great. And when I went to graduate school, it was different because I did go to Georgetown. It's an amazing city and amazing people, but finding your way in making, there wasn't a Latino association, and there weren't people like me. I was one of 2 Latinos who were doing the program, so it was a real difficult time. But I do want to say that after years of experience, I would definitely say, look to your faith. Whatever that may be in organizations, connect to your community, and then also reach out to the Latino Association of Princeton and see who's in town and connect with them, because they're also open and happy to make that connection and help you along as you make that transition. And I wish I would have done more of that when I was younger.
So when I moved to DC, I knew 4 people, 2 of whom were my grandparents. So I just said yes to everything. And because it was my first year out of school, I really threw myself into my work. So all my friends really became work friends. which was really wonderful to have that support group there. But I also realized that I needed something more. So when I moved to New York, I started getting involved in my community, going to my community board meetings. And I just started going to things on my own, which was really nerve-wracking because I have a really wonderful, large friend group in New York City, but they're all Princeton people. Well, now I have friends outside of Princeton, but originally they just were all Princeton people. And after a while, I was like, I need some diversity in terms of my friend group. We can't all have gone to Princeton together. So I sometimes, every so often, will go on like Eventbrite, and I just will type in, free nonprofit panels or free women's like political networking groups, because those are things I'm interested in. And I will just go by myself and I will meet new people. And I try to be very conscious that there's spaces in which I will feel comfortable. Women, Latino women, progressive, that's my political preference. That has gotten me outside of my bubble in terms of the Princeton bubble. And I've really been able to have amazing friendships and working in my community, both now at my job, but also doing volunteer work. I can now walk around my neighborhood and run into people I know. And that's really wonderful. So I still have the same yes mentality, but I try to make sure I don't get like pigeonholed into what I already know, but trying to break that into some new adventures.
Awesome. I have some new ideas now for how I can build community for myself outside of work, because that has been a challenge for me as well, just being a year out of college. And I actually moved to Boston, where I don't have close friends from college. I've come to know people here, but I don't have a close Princeton community. So that has definitely been difficult, but I'm getting there, little by little, trying to build that community in ways that are not necessarily always connected to Princeton, which I think is also important, right? Is building that bubble that's not a Princeton bubble. So we've talked about community, kind of outside of work, but I have, this is going to be my last question before, we can take questions from the viewers. Might be a bit of a curveball, but something I've personally struggled with at times is talking about, as a woman of color in a predominantly white workspace, talking about these topics of diversity and what it means for me to be in that space. I went into the place I'm working at now that's predominantly white and didn't really know how to start that conversation / if I should even start it. I think I was really tiptoeing the line of didn't want to make people uncomfortable if I brought up topics of race, especially in this politically tense era that we're living in. So do you have any advice or suggestions for approaching those conversations in the workplace, or for not approaching them? Because that's something that I have had a lot of questions about over the last year.
Mm-hmm. So from my personal experience, I think when I started working, doing education research, I did feel the need to voice, and I wanted camaraderie. And yes, you're right, justified in how your feelings, but I didn't have a venue to do that. And it took me several years to approach HR and say, I really feel like we need some diversity here, but I didn't know what I wanted out of that. And I think there's you have to be really cautious about what it is that you're expecting. I think we need to be validated in how we feel, but that may not be, the workplace may not be the venue for that. But it may be a place to bring in a training, to have a guest speaker, so that you start having that dialogue without it being kind of conscribed and just forced. So I think it's really, what do you want to see changed, and what's the best way of doing that? And I'm sure a lot of people who would be happy to give you advice on trainings and resources that you can bring to your particular workplace.
Yeah, I really, really agree. The trainings, because as much as it's for like you to feel like you are in a safe and welcoming environment, it's also so that way your colleagues kind of know what's going on. My first couple of years in the workforce, I'm not going to say where, we're in like 98% plus white. environments. And I was always the least amount of privileged person in the room, even though I have a significant amount of privilege. And now I'm in a work environment where it's completely flipped. And I'm able, it's like it's just so diverse in every way you can think of. And it's only in retrospect that I realize what a constricting work environment I used to be in, and how I had to adapt. And I didn't realize it then. I think I did subconsciously, but it's not until that I'm in a like extraordinarily supportive environment that I'm like, I wish I had that. And the way that I would have wanted to change it would be through trainings and hiring practices. That way I wasn't the only one. And by only one, like I'm like really white. And that's how I felt still. So I think through trainings and through hiring practices and by finding someone that you can speak honestly with, like I didn't have that. And I wish that I did.
So for me, in addition to having trusted mentors and friends that I could talk to about things that were going on at work that weren't necessarily things that were appropriate for me to bring up in that space, dealing with issues of health inequity was imperative in the work that I was doing in health policy in New York State. And so I didn't really have the luxury of not being able to talk about diversity. And unfortunately, as the only Latina, the only Black woman sitting at the table, on a steering committee for a statewide consumer advocacy coalition to make sure that, people like me and my family were having their needs met, I had to be the person who was talking about health equity. But I will say that it really weighed on me and made me very uncomfortable. It felt like, no, this is something you guys are already supposed to care about. And so it was very upsetting a lot of the time. But I will say that, the way out of that, it doesn't make it less upsetting, but it does help you get things done, is finding an ally who also sits at that table, who at least can understand the things that you care about and maybe present them for you so that it's not, you're performing less emotional labor and you're able to preserve yourself and your professionalism. And also because sometimes other people listen better when the messenger is somebody else, unfortunately. And so being able to be okay with that and kind of, know that there's somebody on your side, but who maybe is a more effective messenger for a less effective audience that you're working with, is something that really helped me.
One more thing I want to add real quick is I think if you find yourself to be in an uncomfortable environment and, you can't find an ally, you can't find someone to listen to, or you've talked to someone and they're ignoring you, it's also okay to leave. And I think women, particularly women of color, just we'll stay and we'll put up with things and work hard and take on that burden. But it's okay to say no and to take yourself out of that situation, find a place that does value you for who you are and everything you bring to the table. And I don't think that's talked about enough. I know a lot of women and a lot of women of color who put up with situations that really they shouldn't have to, because they feel they need to stay to prove something. And I always say, you can also leave, and they are missing out. So I also wanted to bring that up.
I think that's really, really important. And I think it's, you're caught between, I am representing my culture, my ethnicity, and I have to be the voice. But I couldn't agree with you more that, you're also your mental well-being and your physical well-being is much more important in the long run than making a particular stand, if that is how you feel. I would completely concur with that.
I also please leave toxic work environments.
I guess
Thank you.
I can pose a question to the group really quick that I have some curiosity about. So I graduated 2 years ago now, And one of the toughest things I found once I left the orange bubble was figuring out how to do very practical things like find an apartment and putting in a work order to get things fixed in my apartment and stuff like that. I would love it if y'all could talk about those sorts of things that we may have never actually had to do before to be self-sufficient.
I was just thinking about this today because, I just moved with my partner. It's just the two of us. And previously I've always lived with roommates who, when you live in a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment, you have a lot of people to split everything with. And when it's just you and one other person where you're more or less the same unit, you have to do everything. And what I realize is that there are so many little things that, I think our parents are so used to doing. Like, we had to have our internet installed, and I thought like, oh, they just will flip a switch. No, we had to wait 2 weeks for them to come and schedule an appointment. And we didn't have internet for 2 weeks in our apartment, which just was wild. But all those small things that you look around you at, at your parents or at a family member or someone who's been established for 10 plus years, it's background noise to them, but it's completely new to you, especially Princeton, the dorms, most things were taken care of us for. So it's figuring out how to cook. How long does that take? When I first learned how to cook, or I learned how to cook a long time ago, but when I first started cooking mostly for myself, I didn't get the concept of how to make everything be ready at the same time. So I would have 3-hour meals because I couldn't figure out the timing. And it's just small things like that you just kind of have to laugh at and roll the punches and just be okay, I'll do it differently next time, because people come and it's a never ending list. And I discover a new one every week.
Yeah, I would say it's a lot of trial by fire, kind of like Marielle was just describing. Finding an apartment in Boston was insane.
It's the worst thing.
To describe it. Yeah, Soraya, you know now. And I would say a lot of it is hearing a lot of rejections, a lot of things going wrong, and then occasionally getting lucky, and it's great. And you try to just stay there as long as you can. I feel like that's a lot of what the process is. There isn't a lot of strategy in terms of being able to take care of your home when you have everything else to do. I would say having a schedule has probably been the most helpful thing to me, having a day or at least a time in the week where you do certain things so that they get done, like sweeping your floors and making sure you run the dishwasher and doing laundry and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think routines are so important. And when you're a student for 24/7, you're always adjusting to your classes, to your when you're meeting up with friends, and those daily routines kind of go by the wayside. But as you're adulting, routines are so valuable. And it's not to say that they have to be rigid, but we have just developing systems that work for yourself. I think that's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
So one question someone sent me was, what advice do you guys have for those folks who are trying to find a job straight out of Princeton? Strategies, ideas on finding those sorts of opportunities? Because some people are not necessarily ready to go back to school right after doing a lot of school at Princeton. So any thoughts?
I think this is a tough one, because I think, I remember at Princeton hosting, meetings and get-togethers and networking opportunities. And when you're in Princeton, it's easy because you just have to go. And when you are outside of Princeton, you actually need to make the effort to make these connections and make these networks. but it is so, so valuable. I can't tell you how many jobs I've referenced, connected others to get, because they've asked me, do you know about so-and-so? And I've connected them to somebody else who had that particular job opening, and they got a job. I didn't do that early on. I worked really hard, and I felt like I was just pigeonholed, and I didn't know kind of what to do or who to look for. But, definitely reaching out to other Princetonians and on the board saying, I'm interested in this. And many of you may not be on getting emails from Princeton networking, but they post so many things, and the replies, which just are incredible. Yes, I have so-and-so who has, your niece is interested in this. Here's, my friend from so-and-so who can connect you. So I think I wasn't aware of those things, but there's so many resources out there, and making connections is just important. And if you don't know, ask. I mean, if you don't know, ask. There's nothing wrong by doing so.
One thing I had to really get used to, and I think this ties back into what we were talking before, mentorship, is the idea of leveraging a network was totally foreign to me, because in my family, you work hard. If you work hard, you will get what you deserve because you've worked hard for it. That's not how the world works. The world works based on who you know. And it's still very much like, the old boys club. And I feel like for certain people at Princeton, like they got this, and they already have their network, and they called up so and so, were able to get that connection. For me, it was a lot of first getting over the fact that I'm cold emailing people, because again, I'm like, well, I worked hard. I went to Princeton. Like, shouldn't, like, I did what I was supposed to. But that, again, that's not how the world works. So it's getting over that mentality and saying, like, all right, I'm going to ask someone for coffee. They may not know me, but I'm going to ask anyway, and being okay if I never got a response back, or the response was 3 months later. But in general, the Princeton alumni network are really, really receptive. And while they may not be exactly the dream job that you want, or work in the dream company, they may know someone who does. So like that coffee, that lunch, that phone call will lead to something else. And that's I think just like a good skill to develop, and also like cultivating that. It's not just about when you get the job, and this is something I'm really bad at and I'm like actively working on. But when you make those connections, send them a note saying, hey, thanks so much. Conversation with XYZ who you set me up with went great. 3 months later, 6 months later, say, hey, I landed a job. This is where I am, or I'm still looking, just wanted to, loop back in. Because you never know where those connections may lie. So it's not just about like making the connections and like having the courage to put yourself out there, but also like cultivating them like a plant, continuously watering them.
Yep.
So I don't have much more to add than what Marielle and Rosio has said. Mentoring and networking is so important, especially if you want to do something that's very niche, or where the world is very small, which is kind of the boat that I fall into, doing like children and family policy and advocacy work. I will say that every job that I've ever gotten has been through networking, emailing the person who came and spoke to my class and seeing who else they know. One of the things that I'm doing as I'm interning this summer is trying to see, who do they know? Who can they connect me with as I'm, trying to work really hard for them as well. And I also want to empathize for everyone for whom networking is not their thing. It's not my thing. I'm really introverted and don't like it, but it's something that you kind of just have to do in order to, make these opportunities happen for yourself. Also, I want to emphasize the huge effect of saying thank you. Also, people really like handwritten notes. They go so far. So just like, if that's something that, appeals to you, definitely do it.
Bree, can I add something?
Of course.
Yeah, so I think one thing in particular that helped me was, as an undergraduate especially, was attending some of the alpha events on campus. I think that halfway through my time in college, the Latino community came out much more prominently. I think my freshman and sophomore years, I was still trying to figure out my place at Princeton, and see what resources were available to me. But I left Princeton with a good list of people in my corner that I've been able to go back to, not just for professional advice, but also just, like bouncing ideas as to what interests me and what I would be happy doing. And I think that, to the extent that if there are students listening, to the extent that you can start to cultivate that now while you're a student, that will go a long way, because a lot of the people that I met 2 or 3 years ago are people who I'm in touch with on a regular basis now, even just to give them updates on my life, So every connection or every moment of outreach that you make doesn't necessarily have to be with a purpose in mind. It can just be to tell that person, here's how I'm doing, hope you're doing well, because people like to know what you're up to. People like to know how you're doing.
Yeah. And I just want to add one more thing to that. When you reach out to people, they truly do want to know how you're doing. And, in a way, it's especially when it comes for professors and asking professors for recommendations, like it is their job to do that. Like it is the job of professors. And, some folks may think it's their job as an older alum to give back to the next generation. So shifting my mindset from like, oh no, like I'm just asking them for something, to wait, like this is a two-way thing. They enjoy doing this. This is an obligation that they may feel like in terms of helping like the next generation. And this is something my friend told me at reunions just a couple of weeks ago. So, this is was a giant revelation for me and made me far more comfortable, to reach out to folks that maybe I hadn't talked to in a long time. Cause I was like, wait, they may be really happy to hear from me.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one more thing. It's that it takes time to make these connections, and and my only other advice would be just be yourself, because that's who people want to know and who they want to connect with. So we all graduated from Princeton. We're all super smart. Right now it's not about competition. It's about making those relationships and people finding out who you really are. So just stay true to yourself when you make these connections.
And as a super brief follow-up, one or two of you could talk about, I think this came up a little bit earlier, but talking about when do you know it's time to take the leap into the next step? How do you, what do you kind of feel?
It's never going to be perfect. At least in my opinion and experience, you are always going to have some sort of doubt. There will always be lingering, what if, that hypothetical opportunity that could potentially be the next one. You're never going to feel 100%. And once you realize that, for me, a lot of that stress just was let go, and I was able to focus on leaping in. That being said, don't rush into anything that you have significant doubts. But it's never going to be the perfect time. It's rarely going to be the perfect job, the perfect opportunity. And I think you need to figure out, what are the most important things for you that you need to have, and what are the nice to haves, and where can you compromise? Because it's not going to be 100%, but can you get to 80 or 90? Or is it going to be 70 because this is your first job right out of college?
And I agree with Marielle, although I will say, if you're not growing or you no longer see opportunities for you to grow, I think that, it's safe to say that it's time to move on. And maybe that's when you start looking for the next thing.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add to that, don't wait till you're so unhappy at your job, because then it makes it much more difficult for you to find the new stage or the next job. As soon as you start feeling that this may not be, I'm not learning anymore, I didn't get the promotion, or this work just isn't interesting me anymore, that's when you should start really looking.
Okay, so there are two other questions that came up. I'm going to say both of them, and you guys can decide which one you want to answer, or if you want to answer both at the same time or whatever. So one of them is, what is the most valuable tip for doing well in an interview? And the other one is, how do you recommend students handle everyday stress and anxiety, knowing that change and diversity in the work or school environment comes slowly? Two big questions.
So I'm going to do a quick answer to both of those, because unfortunately I'm going to have to step out in a couple minutes here. But in terms of my recommendation for how to do well on an interview, obviously preparation is everything. But again, I will go be yourself. If you can link who you are to the interview, it becomes so much more powerful. So don't miss those opportunities to talk about yourself in a way that connects to whatever the question is. I think that just is so valuable, and everybody's going to be prepared. And by that, I mean, you know, this company inside and out, and you've done your research clearly. In terms of anxiety and change and the fact that diversity takes time, this is where all these questions are really combined, in that you need to have your network of people who are your support system, who are your, you know, your work system, and that so that you can de-stress and you can vent and you can, you know, yell into the pillow when you can't do that at work, because there's going to be moments like that, and it's completely okay to feel that way, because change takes time. And it's a hard thing when we want to change the world and we want it to happen now, but it's a hard thing to come to terms with. It's not going to happen tomorrow. But if you have your support systems in place, it'll make it a little easier.
To answer this question, I agree with Rosio. Find your tribe. It's probably one of the most important things you can do. And also, echoing something that she said earlier, really prioritize your mental health. I know it's not something that we're all necessarily brought up to do, or that we may even feel comfortable doing initially, but it's really important for kind of getting us through, especially if you're in an industry where it still really is the old boys club.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first question again? Sorry.
Preparing for an interview.
Preparing for an interview. The most important thing for an interview, I would actually say the follow-up. Very few people apparently send thank you notes after a follow-up. And the job I have now, my first interview was a phone interview, and I thought I bombed it. I got really flustered. It just was bad, and I thought I did a terrible job, and I was like Googling like what do you do after you bomb an interview? And the advice I got from talking to a couple of people plus reading Google was follow-up. And I wrote a very thoughtful follow-up acknowledging that I may not have been my best in that interview, and then re-answering the questions how I wish I could have answered them. And I had never done that before. Usually I do the standard, like, thank you so much. This is what I look forward to. Here are my skills again. But I really put myself out there, and that's the job I have now. So I think like follow-up says a lot about you.
Mm-hmm.
And from someone who I was talking to who's a mentor, they said that not a lot of people follow up. So follow up. And then the other thing is what you do when you're stressed. Find something you love. You know, for me, that was dance. I would find a dance class. I would find a dance performance. I would carve out, you know, an hour if I could a week to do that thing that made me happy and made me fulfilled and complete. And then at a certain point of getting sick of working in all old white man spaces, I said, screw this. I'm, you know, working in a space that people like me are in the majority. So I think I went very far on the other side of, you know, change. I went to the change rather than waiting for the change to come to me.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I would say that as far as interview tips go, I think doing the research before you walk in, you know, being yourself, but also just making sure that, you know, you have an idea of like the values of the company, the mission of the organization you are about to interview with. You know, I think that I actually, for my job, I get to interview applicants for my same position, which is kind of crazy because I was interviewing people 3 months out of college. It's very weird. But I really appreciated when applicants came in and told me, you know, in their responses, they gave me feedback or they gave me knowledge that they had gained from reading on our website about our program and what people in my position at my job do. That shows that you've taken the time and initiative to do your research, and that's really important. That goes a long way too.
Yeah. And ask good questions. Prepare and ask really good questions too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Bree, do we have any other questions from viewers?
I think that's all that's been submitted. So if panelists want to give any lasting words of wisdom.
I would say that people are more willing to help than you think. And, I think if you, as my colleagues today have said, if you put yourself out there, you will get more than you expect back. And especially, I think this conversation here will tell you how caring and how willing we are to really extend our knowledge and learn from other people. And that's, I think, the asset. I think the value of going to Princeton is this connection right here. And I think I'm going to sign off with that. And I'm happy and welcome to answer anybody's questions offline via email or whatever. I don't know if you can share my email address, but it's been a pleasure. Unfortunately, I have to go.
Thank you so much for joining today.
So one thing that I think is serving really well is just being able to laugh and to always be willing to learn. Like, you will most likely burn food when you're cooking. You will most likely have a roommate that at some point you cannot stand. And it's going to be frustrating the moment you'll have a manager or a boss that just is not very good. Like, these things will happen. It would be great if they don't, but it's also life. So I think just like understand that things happen, laugh at it, learn from it, and do better next time. And that's, I think, kept me not just sane but also happier.
I think both ending statements are, really valuable. I will also say, protect your sanity. None of this pursuit of further education, if that's what you're doing, or a particular job, none of them are worth your sanity and your well-being. So just always keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Bree, do you have any advice you'd like to give 2 years out of Princeton?
Well, I'm going to say stay open to opportunities. You never know who you might meet and what might happen and what might come out of a conversation. And I think right out of college, it can be a little bit scary to be like, yeah, I'm going to take the leap and make this big life decision or do this really cool project that I want to do with this person I met. But don't sell yourself short and take the opportunity.
Yeah. I would like to add one more quick thing. Bree kind of sparked it for me. It's okay to feel a little lonely or confused or lost, or that you don't have everything figured out, especially that first year out. And guess what? Everyone else feels the same way and is in the same boat. And you will figure it out eventually, but you don't have to figure it out right now. That's something that my friends and I talked about. I think it was like 3-4 years out that we all discovered we felt the same way right out of school, but we didn't talk about it because, it was like, oh, everyone else is doing so great. It's just me that has all these doubts. But sometimes it's a hard transition. So speaking about it, being open, having that support system is really important.
Also, to be clear, I'm still figuring it out. I'm starting lessons that I've learned in these last 5 years since I've left Princeton, but it's all definitely still a work in progress. Adulting is a process for sure.
And it can be fun. And sometimes not fun, but also fun.
I think it gets mostly fun.
It can be fun, yeah. Awesome. Well, I think with that, we'll sign off for tonight. But I want to thank both of you for joining us tonight and providing insight and wisdom into, what life has been like after college and, the different things you've got to explore and, different setbacks and challenges, but also, the tips and tools that you've talked to us about for navigating different spaces. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you, Soraya, for moderating, Taylor, Marielle, and Rosio for being our wonderful panelists and for bearing with the growing pains of figuring out the technology. We're really grateful that you guys were our first panelists. And I'm gonna really quickly project a few words of advice that were shared by some ALPA alumni and read them really quickly. So Jeremy Borjon, class of 10 and 17, says he wished he had known that there are resources on the financial aid website about financial literacy. So you should definitely check those out. Google financial literacy. Jose Colon says he wished he had known about the importance of saving and investing in the future. Noemi de la Puente says how connected and willing to help the alumni network is, and also how to deal with security deposits and landlord issues. Jenny Corin says, I wish I had known that I should have contacted Princeton alumni in the city to which I moved as soon as I graduated from Princeton. Please do not be shy about reaching out to us. Abril Loya McLeod says, ask for help and don't worry about being a burden. We're here to help you. Soraya, you said this is the time to test all of your assumptions about your interests and what fulfills you. So use this time to explore different paths. And Marisa Salazar said, it takes time to build the same kind of deep friendships many of us had at Princeton. So keep that in mind for your time outside of the orange bubble. I'm gonna stop projecting this. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. My name is Bree Christophers again. My information is on TigerNet. If you're interested in connecting with any of the panelists, I can help put you in contact with them. And if you're looking for any support as a current student or a young alum, the Association of Latino Princeton Alumni is here to help. So reach out and let us know what we can do. All right, that's it for tonight. Thanks, y'all.
Night.
Night.